Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Elections are meant to be the best of times to debate the grand strategic questions facing the nation, but maybe they're the worst. The sublime arguments can get supplanted by the squalid struggle for votes. Even parties 20% ahead in the polls can't resist bribing the public. Is that what is happening here with regard to pensioners? An important question for this election is, who should get more of the pie, the old or the young? The old have been doing relatively well, partly thanks to the so-called triple lock, which ensures the state pension keeps rising by the inflation rate, or with earnings, or at 2.5%, whichever of those three is the higher. Now, it has kicked in while working age welfare and wages have fallen back. So, as party manifestos are cobbled together, is now the time to suggest to voters an end to the triple lock. Well, the subject came up in the Commons today, Labour and the SNP wanting to keep it, Theresa May was not saying, and there is understood to be a battle going on behind the scenes in the Tory party over whether to drop it from their manifesto or not. Here's our policy editor, Chris Cook, on why politicians have liked to splash the cash on the old.
A clear choice between a Labour Party who in government saw the increase in basic state pension of 75 pence in 1 year, and a Conservative government whose changes to pensions mean basic state pensioners are £1,250 better off.
I simply say this: Labour will guarantee the triple lock. Labour will treat pensioners with respect, and we won't move the goalposts to people looking forward to retirement.
For the last 20 years or so, it may as well have been a constitutional requirement that politicians should campaign on how generous they plan to be to pensioners.
Thank you very much.
The rationale is surely not just that they're warm-hearted, nor that we all aspire to be old. Cynics among you might note that, first, the elderly are a growing group of voters. And old people turn out to vote more than younger people. They vote and they swing elections. But it's not just a cynical ploy. In 1997, someone who was 70 had a much lower income than someone who was about 35. Pensioner poverty was a top-tier social problem. Since then, though, successive politicians have looked to address that problem.
The winter fuel allowance.
Free TV licence for over 75s.
Free bus travel.
Free eye test.
Free television licences.
A winter fuel allowance of £150.
And they've succeeded. When you adjust for housing costs, older people are now better off than those younger counterparts. The political incentives are still there, but the case for spending a lot more on pensioners simply isn't as strong as it once was.
Chris Cook there. Well, I'm joined by Nick Watt, our political editor. So, Nick, obviously everyone's writing their manifestos. This has turned into one of those really interesting debates for the parties. What is going on in the Conservatives?
Well, obviously there was a flurry of excitement this afternoon when, as you say, the Prime Minister declined to give a definitive answer about whether she will stand by that pension triple lock in the manifesto. I'm told that no decision has been made yet and that the Prime Minister is taking a very long, hard look at this. She's looking at the costings. One member of the Cabinet said to me it is a challenge to meet the costs. She's looking at the polling data to see what people think. And the balance she wants to strike is a fair deal for pensioners whilst doing more for young people, what the geeks call intergenerational fairness.
Right. What are the options then? I mean, you can obviously stick with it, but what are there other in-between options?
Option number one is you stick with it for the entirety of the next Parliament. And the thinking on that is that given that inflation is going to be running at or above the Bank of England target of 2%, why not just carry on with the triple lock, because pensions are going to be increasing by around 2.5% anyway. Option number two is you stand by the Conservatives' current commitment, which is to keep it until 2020, but after 2020 you give yourselves more flexibility by moving from a triple lock to a double lock. And under a double lock you scrap that 2.5% target and you go for increasing it with ever the highest of inflation or average earnings. If you do that, you're coming into line with the review by John Cridland, the former head of the CBI, who talked about getting rid of the 2.5% target, increasing the retirement age in the late 2020s to 68. That saves you a lot of money, which can be spent on social care.
Right. When's the manifesto, the Tory manifesto?
It will be the week beginning Monday, the 8th of May.
A little bit of time to wait. Well, look, let's be clear. A lot of pensioners do struggle, but in decades past, pensioner poverty was far worse than it is now. It was really part of the landscape, rather like the care crisis is these days, and it was a sustained and concerted effort that eased the problem. But is it time to stop giving special treatment to pensioners? Well, we asked to speak to the government, but no one was available. So I'm joined by David Cameron's former pensions minister, Baroness Ros Altman, and by Ian Blackford, who speaks on pensions for the SNP, and it was they who asked the question that got some indecision from Theresa May. Ros Altman, you're not a fan of this thing. You were there in government. You were part of the party that pledged it. What's wrong with it?
Well, the triple lock made some sense when it was first introduced because pensioners had fallen behind and it guaranteed that you would be increasing their pensions. But actually, it is a little bit of a trick because it doesn't apply to all of the state pension, only bits of it. And in fact, it doesn't apply to the pension credit, which is what the poorest pensioners live on. And if you want to look at poor pensioners, actually, those are the ones you want to most protect. So this 2.5%, which is an illogical, arbitrary figure.
It just came out of what, by the 2.5%? Why 2.5%?
There was something in the state pension that looked at 2.5% a long time ago, but effectively, it's not got any economic or social rationale. Prices, you want pensioners to keep up with the cost of living. Average earnings, you don't want them to fall behind the rest of the economy. And we do have to protect pensioners, but I think the triple lock is
You'd be happy with a double
political
lock, basically. The double lock idea is fine. Yeah.
The double lock is the fairest, and also it's better for the young, because the more the triple lock stays, the more pressure there is to keep increasing the state pension age.
Why are the SNP so in favour of it then, Ian?
Because this is the right thing to do. We heard in the clip about the 75p increase in pensions that we had some years ago. And the fact remains, Ros talks about the fact that there are measures there to deal with poverty. We've got 1.6 million pensioners in this country in poverty.
That's a much lower rate than children. Much higher rate of poverty among children. Why would you not make a pledge for children?
In my constituency, there are 77% of pensioners in
Is it just
poverty.
Your constituency?
No, it's not. But I'm giving that as an indication.
But why would you make a pledge for pensioners across the whole country? You're a progressive party.
We are, but let me say this.
Why don't you make the pledge for child benefit?
Let me say this to you. We had the situation in 1979 that the state pension was 26% of average earnings. If the triple lock was to remain in place to 2020, according to Cridland, it would still only get to 24%. Pensioners are playing catch up, and it's not the fault of pensioners that we haven't had wage growth in the economy, real wage growth that would deal with some of the economic fundamentals. We need to make sure that we have that. You don't take it out on the pensioners.
You're not taking anything out on the pensioners if you take away the 2.5%, as long as you put this double lock in place, so you make sure that they don't fall behind the economy and keep up with the cost of living. And you also need to apply it to the pension credit, because that's what the poorest pensioners live on.
Isn't what's really going on here? I don't want to get too much stuck in the weeds because this argument will go on, but you're just playing politics, aren't you? Because A, you're never going to be in a position to implement it because you're not a national UK party, it's a national UK issue. You're trying to trap the UK government into committing themselves to something.
Not at all.
Which may actually turn out to be impractical.
It's really important for us that pensioners can live in dignity in their retirement. The biggest issue that we've fought over the last year and a half has been about women pensioners that have seen an increase in their pensionable age, and we have given the government proposals that would deal with that issue. Cost $8 billion over the course of a 5-year parliament. That's a consequential that if Scotland were independent that we would make. So we've made commitments to pensioners that we would make sure that we delivered in an independent Scotland. So we're talking about the responsibility that we have to the elderly in our society.
What is your advice to the Conservative Party, which is obviously sitting thinking about what goes in their manifesto? Maybe you're advising them about it, maybe you're doing it behind the scenes.
Keeping the triple lock will increase the pressure on the state pension age. Pushing up the state pension age
actually,
is unfair.
That just hurts younger people because they're the ones who. It's not the current.
So not only will they have to pay for the cost of the triple lock, they themselves will end up with a higher state pension age. I think keeping the triple lock until now has been fine. If you want to keep it to 2020, as you were indicating before, that's the commitment that has already been made. But beyond that, It's a political
but
construct.
Is she being a bit cowardly?
Political football.
Couldn't she just say that? I mean, she must think the same as you, I would have thought. I mean, most experts think the same as you, don't they?
It's illogical.
Yeah.
It's got no economic or social
Is she just being
rationale.
cowardly? Because she's going into this election as a strong leader, but she's looking very indecisive on this. And
well, you don't really need to make a commitment now on this issue, as long as you commit to protecting pensioners properly. And the triple lock doesn't protect pensioners properly.
If you take the OBR numbers, and we've gone to the House of Commons library, and we've looked at what would be the effect if we took away the triple lock, and over a 5-year period, pensioners would be £872 worse off if the triple lock was taken away. And we have to remember...
That shows you're taking a lot of money from the rest of the population to give to pensioners.
With
very
respect,
nice.
With respect, you're not, Evan, but I'll explain why. Because there is a 30 billion surplus in the National Insurance Fund.
Which is used to cover everything.
No,
it's not just covered
this is actually only used to cover pensions. And so the fact that we can protect pensioners, it can be done through the National Insurance Fund. Cridland even suggests that the National Insurance Fund will remain in surplus.
Who is the more progressive of the two of you? Who is the one that, I mean, because the SNP portray themselves as a progressive party and you're a Conservative. Which is the more progressive policy?
I think what we need to do is get away from political nonsense. And the 2.5% is a political construct. It's not logical, and it has consequences that are damaging for not only pensioners, because increasingly as we go forward, the oldest and poorest pensioners will fall behind because they're not triple locked.
She is currently, Theresa May, currently the figures are, she has 62% support among the over 65s. I mean, if you're ever going to take a difficult decision for the over 65s, wouldn't you be able to do it if you have 62% support among them? I mean,
or if you win with a very big majority.
So you just hope they'll abandon it now, basically, or
I think we know that the triple lock is not going to stay in place forever. It's a question of when it's going to go, because you can't keep on with this arbitrary figure. It's not sensible policy.
Thank you both very much indeed. Thanks, Ian.
I've been getting